What if Padme Amidala was a serial killer? What would happen then? We pick up the story right before the assassination attempt on Padme's life. Let's begin. Beneath her pilot's helmet, Padme's expression remained neutral as she piloted her Royal N1 starfighter toward the Coruscant landing platform. Beside her, the decoy ship carried Corday, wearing one of Padme's formal senatorial ensembles. The explosion came exactly 67 seconds after landing. Even through her pilot's helmet, Padme could appreciate the aesthetic symmetry of the blast pattern. As she rushed to Corday's side, she maintained the exact degree of visible grief that protocol demanded. Not a tear more, not a tear less. "I'm sorry, milady." Corday's final words. What an absurd thing to say, Padme thought. Corday was apologizing for being assassinated. Clearly her neurons were misfiring in their final moments. There was no logic to it. And if there was one thing Padme understood, it was logic, patterns, the predictable way sentient beings moved through life right up until they didn't. Captain Typho's security briefing lasted exactly 7 minutes longer than necessary. Padme counted every second, while cataloging 14 different ways she could have prevented the attack herself. 13 of them were technically illegal in the Republic. The 14th was merely frowned upon in polite society. Hours later, in Palpatine's office, Master Yoda's green, wrinkled face attempted sympathy. Padme matched his concern with exactly the right amount of grateful humility. Jedi, for all their mystical posturing, were just sentient beings like any other. And sentience, as Padme had learned very early in life, were easy to control with the right set of words. Species didn't matter. Gangan, Twi'lek, human, even whatever Master Yoda was, they all followed the same basic patterns. Patterns she'd mastered long ago. Count Dooku was once a Jedi. He couldn't assassinate anyone, Mace Windu declared when she suggested the former Master's involvement. The Jedi's certainty amused her, as if being part of their Order ones somehow made murder impossible. Additional security might be the wisest course of action, Senator, Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine suggested, his tone deliberately measured. Chancellor, if I may comment, I do not believe the situation warrants rather extreme measures, my dear. Jedi protection, in fact, Palpatine interrupted. The corners of his mouth twitched upward slightly. Perhaps someone you are familiar with. An old friend, like Master Kenobi, Palpatine suggested. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now there was a name that brought back memories. She remembered him from the Trade Federation crisis, the perfect Jedi, following his now dead master around Naboo like a well-trained pet. You must return to Naboo with the Jedi. For your own safety, of course, Palpatine said. Chancellor, she replied, her voice calibrated to exactly 70% respect and 30% deference, the perfect ratio for appearing harmless. I appreciate your concern, but surely my vote on the Military Creation Act is not worth your life, my dear, Palpatine interrupted again. No one had interrupted Padme since her days as queen. The last person who did suffered an unfortunate political accident involving 3 scandals, 2 resignations, and 1 mysterious disappearance. Naboo politics could be so unpredictable sometimes. You will not refuse an official order from the office of the Supreme Chancellor, will you, Senator? Palpatine asked. Padme rose from her chair with mechanical precision, each movement calculated, measured, perfect. Of course not, Chancellor, she replied, while mentally adding another name to her carefully curated list of people who had underestimated her. It was a very short list, as names were crossed off rather quickly. As she left the office, her thoughts drifted particularly to a certain handcrafted Durasteel axe from Naboo's finest weapons maker, a gift to herself upon becoming queen. She'd never had a proper occasion to use it, on anything other than wildlife, anyway. That was going to change. The Jedi would be a complication, of course, but they were just beings with fancy tricks, beings who followed predictable patterns. The walk back gave her time to plan. She had approximately 3 hours before the Jedi would arrive, more than enough time to refresh her memory on their tendencies. 10 years ago, she'd studied the footage of Qui-Gon Jinn's every move during the Trade Federation crisis, analyzing his patterns, his habits. She'd never needed to use that information, but she had it all the same. Knowledge, after all, was another kind of weapon. His apprentice would be similar. Jedi were nothing if not creatures of habit, training their Padawans to follow the same predictable code. And Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan's current apprentice, well, she remembered him as well. He would not be an issue either, Padme Amidala decided. In her chambers, Padme dismissed her handmaidens with practiced grace. I need time to meditate on today's tragedy, she told them, her voice carrying just the right note of restrained grief. They bowed and left. Once alone in her chambers, she opened her special cache. The weight of the Durasteel axe felt familiar in her hands, a reminder of her solo hunting trips in the forest near Theed. Those quiet excursions where she'd stalked through the underbrush, learning exactly how much force it took to bring down Naboo's wildlife. The wooden handle was worn smooth from use, its balance perfect after years of practice. She had that rare Naboo wine ready too, the vintage she knew Palpatine favored. A few glasses would be enough to dull even a Chancellor's concentration. After all, even the most powerful beings had to let their guard down eventually. A soft chime announced visitors at her door, right on schedule. Padme carefully replaced the axe, smoothed her expression into one of diplomatic welcome, and went to greet her old friends. After all, proper manners were everything in politics, especially when planning a murder. The door slid open to reveal Obi-Wan Kenobi, looking exactly as predictably Jedi-like as she expected. Behind him stood Anakin Skywalker, who was decidedly less composed. "Master Kenobi," she said, her voice precise and measured. "It's been a while." "And Anakin, my goodness, you've grown." She watched with hidden amusement as the young Padawan stumbled over his words, something about growing more beautiful. "For a senator," he hastily added. Predictable indeed. Even Obi-Wan's subtle eye roll followed the exact pattern of a long-suffering master she'd anticipated. "We will safely get you to Naboo, milady, I can assure you," Obi-Wan promised, ever the professional. Padme allowed herself to look appropriately troubled. "I'm grateful for your concern, masters, but I'm afraid I must make a difficult request." She let her voice catch slightly, just enough to suggest genuine emotion. "Before we depart for Naboo, I wish to properly honor Corday's sacrifice. A day of mourning, nothing more." She noticed how Anakin's focus intensified at the hint of her distress, while Obi-Wan's expression showed diplomatic sympathy. So easy to read these Jedi, so easy to predict. "Of course, Senator," Obi-Wan agreed. "We understand the importance of paying proper respects." They had no idea that they'd just given her exactly what she needed. Time to arrange one final meeting with Chancellor Palpatine. Time to prepare that special vintage of Naboo wine. Time to ensure her axe was properly positioned. "Thank you, Master Kenobi," she replied, allowing a small, sad smile. Anakin was still looking at her, concern in his eyes. It was almost endearing. It would make him all the easier to maneuver around when the time came. After all, distracted protectors were the best kind of protectors, when one had a Chancellor to kill anyway. Before she could begin her mission, Padme needed to collect something from two individuals, who, at this time, could be found within the executive building. Within an hour of the Jedi's arrival, Padme had found her excuse to visit her office in the building. "I should collect some of Corday's personal effects from my office," she said to the two Jedi, her voice carrying just the right note of melancholy. "Anakin," Obi-Wan said in that particular teacherly tone of his, "escort the senator to her office. Consider it an exercise in constant vigilance." "Yes, Master." Anakin's attempt at a stoic Jedi response was almost betrayed by the way he straightened up just a bit too quickly, trying desperately to seem professionally detached rather than eager. Soon, Senator Amidala and Padawan Skywalker landed within the hangar of the Republic Executive Building. The transparent film on her palms was undetectable, a little trick she'd picked up during her more adventurous training sessions between Queen and Senator, the things one learned when studying every possible method of protection and infiltration. She moved through the halls like a ghost, every step calculated, every movement precise. 10 years as a public figure had taught her exactly how to be seen without being noticed. Anakin's presence behind her was anything but subtle. She could practically feel him switching between trying to scan for threats and stealing glances at her. "You haven't changed a bit," he was saying, obviously attempting to sound casual. "I mean, you've grown more beautiful for a senator, For a senator?" Padme raised an eyebrow, watching his face flush as he tried to maintain that Jedi composure. "Didn't you just say that exact line back at my apartment? And are senators not usually beautiful, Anakin?" "No, yes. He fumbled. "You've always been beautiful. More beautiful than just... I should stop talking." "Oh no, don't do that," Padme said warmly, patting his arm with amusement. His flustered state was perfect. While he focused on finding the right words to express himself, he'd be too distracted to notice what she was actually doing. Through his stammering, she spotted Sly Moore's pale figure gliding toward them. Her first target. "Senator Amidala," Moore said, her voice as cool and even as ever. "You have my deepest sympathies for this morning's tragedy. The attack was a terrible reminder of the dangers we all face." Padme offered a soft, practiced smile, tilting her head just enough to seem vulnerable. "Thank you, Administrator Moore. It's a comfort to know I can rely on colleagues like you during such difficult times." Moore nodded, her expression unchanging. The Chancellor was particularly concerned. He has tasked me with ensuring your security is handled with the utmost care. Your dedication is deeply appreciated, Padme said warmly, extending her hand with perfect senatorial poise. Moore hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for Padme to note it, before taking her hand. Her grip was cold, mechanical, but firm. The film coating Padme's palm captured every detail of Moore's fingerprints flawlessly. Your efforts are invaluable, Padme added. The Republic needs more administrators like you. Moore inclined her head slightly before moving on. As soon as she was out of sight, Padme brought her hands together, the fingers of her left hand brushing over her right palm in a natural gesture. Beneath the motion, the film containing Moore's prints was pressed into place, locking the data in securely. A clean layer of film now covered her right hand. One down, one to go. As they continued the journey to Padme's office, Anakin spoke again. You know, I've thought about you, every now and then since we parted. Padme tilted her head, masking her amusement as she calculated the distance to Mos Amedda. Every now and then, Anakin, she repeated, her voice laced with mock offense. Not every day? Anakin froze mid-step. Well, I mean, you know. Padme placed a delicate hand on her chest, her expression a perfectly calibrated mix of hurt and surprise. Oh, I see. So I wasn't important enough for daily thoughts? No, that's not what I meant. Before he could trip over more of his words, Padme's attention shifted ahead, where Mos Amedda was making his way toward them. She straightened her posture and flashed a polite smile. Hold that thought, Anakin, she said sweetly. As the vice chair approached, he extended his hand, his expression full of concern. Senator Amidala, it's such a relief to see you safe. You've been in all of our thoughts after this morning's incident. Thank you, Vice Chair, Padme replied, clasping his hand warmly. Your support means more than you know. As she held his hand, her palm film picked up his fingerprints with seamless efficiency. 2 down. With practiced subtlety, she brought her hands together again, the now used film locking Amedda's prints in place, while a fresh layer prepared itself on her palm. The rest of the walk was filled with more senators and aides offering their sympathies. Senator Amidala, what a dreadful attack. We're all so relieved you're unharmed. Thank you, truly, Padme replied, shaking hands and offering polite smiles. None of these prints mattered, but she played her role seamlessly. You see, Anakin, she said, as they finally stepped away from the crowd, her voice light and conversational. Some of us do think about others every day. It's called gratitude. You should try it sometime. Padme gave him a light punch on the arm, offered a quick smile, and kept walking. Anakin smiled in return, falling into step beside her. Finally, in her office, Padme settled behind her desk, watching Anakin try to stand at attention like a proper Jedi guard. He lasted about 30 seconds before speaking again. My height has doubled since the last time we met, Senator. And that's when it hit her. Not Anakin doubling his height, but that she had everything she needed. The fingerprints, the perfect excuse, the naive Jedi protection, everything required to put that condescending old fool in his place. How dare he think he could just order Padme Amidala around? Padme turned her chair to face the vast expanse of Coruscant. The daylight was fading, just like how the light in Palpatine's eyes would soon fade. She leaned back, fingers drumming against the armrest, as the thought of what she was about to do began to take shape in her mind. The Chancellor would soon meet his end, by her hand. The first in months she'd have the pleasure of killing. The excitement built slowly, an electric thrill coursing through her veins, and her lips twitched involuntarily. The laugh started low in her throat before exploding out of her, wild and uncontrolled. A most unsenatorial snort followed as she imagined Palpatine's face smashed into the floor. She gripped her desk, tears streaming down her face as the laughter grew more maniacal. Anakin shifted uncomfortably. "Milady!" Padme launched herself from her chair, grabbing Anakin's shoulders and actually shaking him violently as she laughed directly in his face, causing him to stumble back slightly. His eyes widened with concern as she continued cackling. "Your height doubled, Anakin?" she managed between bursts of laughter, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Doubled?" For just a moment, something dark gleamed in her eyes, the look of someone imagining the perfect kill, before she finally collected herself. She draped an arm over his shoulders, still letting out little giggles. "Time to head back," she said, with disturbing cheerfulness, steering a very confused and slightly terrified Anakin toward the door. Behind them, her desk drawers remained untouched. She hadn't even bothered with the pretense of searching for Corday's effects. Her mind was already too full of what was to come, the satisfying thunk of Axe meeting skull, the look of realization in Palpatine's eyes when he understood that he'd fatally underestimated her. A short while later, back in her apartments, Padme waited until precisely the right moment. The encrypted comm device was another relic from her days as queen. the kind of untraceable technology that made certain diplomatic negotiations possible. She took out the comm and contacted Palpatine. Her fingers trembled with barely contained excitement as she activated the encrypted channel. "Chancellor Palpatine," she spoke softly into the device, letting real emotion color her voice. "I apologize for contacting you directly," Padme said. "It's quite all right. What is the matter, Senator Amidala?" Palpatine asked, his tone one of concern. "I have this vintage of Naboo wine," she continued, her heart racing at the thought of what was to come. "From the 52 Reserve, I thought perhaps we could share a drink in her memory in your office." A genuine smile spread across her face. Through the comm came the sound of understanding, a soft ah that made her want to laugh with pure joy. If Palpatine had attempted to sense her thoughts through the Force, all he would find would be authentic happiness, the kind that only comes from knowing you're about to get exactly what you want. Of course, he agreed warmly. "The executive building is quite peaceful in the evening, a proper setting to honor the fallen," Palpatine said. "This night then, Chancellor? I haven't told anyone else about this meeting. It seems appropriate that it's just us, Naboo mourning one of our own." "Our little secret," he agreed. His tone carried that familiar paternal concern that made her want to bury the axe even deeper when the time came. The transmission soon ended, and Padme had made sure that Palpatine will be in his office for the final meeting of his life. Only obstacle now was the Jedi. Obi-Wan had already been taken care of. Earlier, a short while before departing to the executive building with Anakin, she had handed Obi-Wan a small shard of metal, her expression carefully calculated to appear both concerned and intrigued. She told him it was found on her clothes after the explosion, suggesting its importance with just the right mix of worry and curiosity. Her request was simple, that he personally analyze it at the Jedi Temple, away from potentially compromised external labs. Obi-Wan, naturally intrigued by the mysterious evidence, had agreed without hesitation. With a faint smile and gracious thanks for his assistance, she watched him leave after he had instructed Anakin to continue guarding her, the false lead already spinning its web. It was one of many tricks she carried with her, a small, untraceable shard of metal meant to throw off investigations. Now, with Obi-Wan thoroughly occupied, only Typho and Anakin remained to be dealt with. Captain Typho had been even easier to handle. "Captain, I'll be retiring to my chambers to rest after today's ordeal," Padme said, her voice carrying just the right note of weariness. "Anakin will be here to ensure my safety, but I'd feel much better if you kept a vigilant watch over the ship and the external surveillance systems. We can't take any chances after what happened. Also, please do not let anyone in without contacting me, Captain, even Master Obi-Wan. I'd like to think I still have some control over my life and home." Typho nodded, his single eye sharp with determination. "Of course, milady. It will be done." Padme offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Captain. Your diligence means a great deal to me." As he left, she let the smile linger, knowing he'd be thoroughly preoccupied with his task, leaving her with just one more creature to deal with. Back in her apartment, after sending Typho off, Padme studied Anakin's restless pacing. "Anakin," she said softly, stepping closer, her tone calm and reassuring. "Come with me to my chambers. You'll feel better knowing I'm resting properly, and you can keep watch just outside." Anakin hesitated, but her gentle insistence worked, and he followed her into the private sanctuary of her room. Once there, she gestured toward a chair near her bed. "Sit," she said, moving to retrieve a bottle of deep purple wine from her private stores. "I've been saving this for a night of reflection, and I think Corday deserves nothing less. Would you share a glass with me, Anakin?" Padme asked. He frowned slightly. "I'm not sure I should, Padme. Jedi aren't supposed to drink, on duty anyway." Padme smiled faintly, pouring the wine with practiced elegance. "One glass won't hurt someone with your strength, Anakin. You can handle this, can't you?" "It's not about," Anakin began, but Padme interrupted. "Anakin, it's rude to refuse a queen's offer of wine, you know." Her voice carried just the right note of aristocratic disappointment. "And you wouldn't want to be rude to me, would you? It would mean a lot to me if you honored her memory this way." The conflict played across his features like a holofilm. Protocol versus politeness, pride versus prudence. "I suppose one glass wouldn't hurt," Anakin said. "Sit," she said again. This time Anakin obeyed, lowering himself into the chair with a reluctant stiffness. Padme moved to pour the wine, filling 2 glasses. She handed one to him, her voice softening, almost coaxing as she raised her own. "For Corday," she said, touching her glass lightly to his. Anakin hesitated a moment longer, his hand hovering near the glass. He glanced at Padme, his expression practically screaming, "I shouldn't." Padme met his gaze with a calm, almost serene look that radiated, "Do it." Anakin sighed and drank, Padme lifted her own glass as well, taking a sip to keep the moment casual, knowing the knockout agent was at the bottom of his glass, not hers. When he finished the wine, Anakin set the glass down with a satisfied clink and stood. "I'll keep watch outside your door, Senator," he said, his Jedi stoicism returning. "Of course," Padme said, standing too. She followed him at a distance, her steps measured and silent, like when she stalked wildlife on her solo hunting trips. She counted down in her mind. 3, 2, 1. Anakin faltered mid-stride, dropping to one knee as his balance gave out. His eyes lost focus, his hand bracing weakly on the doorframe. "I don't feel," he mumbled, his voice slurring. "You don't feel?" Padme repeated, moving in quickly to catch him before he collapsed fully. Her tone carried a trace of amusement. "Looks like you're feeling it pretty hard, Anakin." She dragged him away from the door, careful to avoid leaving him in anyone's view. Near her bed, she let go, and Anakin slumped forward, landing heavily on the mattress. His legs dangled awkwardly off the edge, so she grabbed them and tossed them onto the bed with an efficient shove. Anakin's breathing was labored, his mouth moving as though he was trying to speak. The agent was already overpowering him, rendering him helpless. He managed a faint sound, but no words came. "Shh," Padme murmured, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. Her voice dropped to a soothing whisper. "Don't fight it. Rest, Anakin. I'll be here when you wake up." His body slackened entirely a moment later, the last remnants of consciousness slipping away. To be certain, Padme lifted his hand and dropped it. It fell limply to the bed without resistance. She leaned in and slapped him right across the face, hard. Anakin didn't stir. Satisfied, Padme straightened and smirked to herself. The agent, designed to knock out a bantha for 2 days, had done its job. Anakin wouldn't wake unless she intervened. Now, with everything in place, she turned her attention to her mission. She moved quickly, her hands precise and efficient as she prepared. Her infiltration attire was already on, an elegant but practical ensemble of fitted black pants and a high-neck top that offered both mobility and a presentable appearance. Perfect for navigating service platforms and later sitting across from a chancellor. From her closet, she retrieved the maintenance uniform she'd acquired 3 months ago, a souvenir from a particularly satisfying evening on level 2455. Its previous owner had made the mistake of posting some rather unpleasant comments about her on the HoloNet. The standard issue coveralls with their hood were identical to what thousands of service workers wore throughout Coruscant's upper levels. She laid it out alongside the magnetic grapple she'd used to slip in and out of her apartment unnoticed, and a sleek black filter mask with angular contours, discrete vents, and a glowing filtration unit, a common accessory in Coruscant's polluted air, perfect for blending in unnoticed. Next came her maintenance kit, a sturdy Durasteel case with convertible straps that could transform it into a backpack, essential for keeping her hands free during the climb. Its contents appeared perfectly ordinary: diagnostic tools, repair equipment, cleaning supplies. But beneath a carefully engineered false bottom lay a compartment precisely sized for the ornate Naboo wine box. The wine box itself was a masterpiece of deception. Its outer design was flawless, exactly what one would expect a senator to present as a gift. The vintage she'd selected for Palpatine rested in the upper compartment, while beneath it, hidden by an intricate sliding mechanism, lay her tools of death. The dismantled Durasteel axe, head, handle, and end piece nestled precisely in their molded spaces, along with a pair of gloves and other items she might need. She slid the wine box into the maintenance kit's hidden compartment and verified that everything appeared perfectly normal when closed. To any observer, it would contain nothing but standard service equipment, carried by just another maintenance worker going about her duties in the upper levels. Turning to Anakin, she took his comlink, slipping it into her own pocket. If Obi-Wan called, she'd be ready with an excuse. She slipped on the maintenance uniform over her infiltration attire, checking that the hood and the filter mask concealed her features properly. The maintenance kit, configured as a backpack, sat snug against her shoulder blades. Inside, alongside her tools of death, lay something that had cost her a small fortune. A computer spike acquired through layers of black market contacts and dead information brokers. For years, she'd dreamed of murdering someone in the executive building, of leaving her mark in those hallowed halls. The spike was just one piece of preparation, bought and stored away for that perfect moment. Now, thanks to Palpatine's presumption in ordering her around like some common senator, that moment had finally arrived. Padme allowed herself a small smile. With her disguise in place and equipment secured, Padme took one last look at Anakin. He lay peacefully on her bed, his face slack. She turned toward the door, her heart racing with the thrill of what was to come. But as Padme reached for the door panel, her hand paused mid-air, as a faint, rhythmic noise broke the silence. It was a mechanical whirring, a sound like drilling. She turned slowly toward the source. Near the far corner of her room, a small, spindly droid hovered outside the window, its claw-like appendage boring into the glass. Instead of reacting, Padme folded her arms and watched with genuine curiosity as the droid finished cutting through the glass. It deployed a thin tube and released 2 kuhuns, deadly Indumodo assassin worms. The venomous creatures dropped silently onto her bedroom floor. She raised an eyebrow. Moving with deliberate calm, she approached the worms. Their segmented bodies gleamed in the dim light as they sought their target. Padme reached down and carefully grasped each one by its tail section, the only safe way to handle a kuhun. The first worm she simply dropped through the hole the droid had cut, but as she prepared to dispose of the second, she paused. A thoughtful expression crossed her face as she glanced between the deadly creature and Anakin's unconscious form. Perhaps the Force had provided her with an unexpected gift. After all, one could never have too many options. She moved to her drink cabinet, selected a tall, slender bottle of Corellian brandy, and emptied its contents into the sink. With methodical precision, she deposited the kuhun into the bottle and secured the lid, puncturing a small breathing hole with one of her tools. Opening her maintenance kit, she carefully nestled the bottled assassin worm alongside her other implements in the wine box's secret compartment. One never knew when a supposedly untraceable poison might prove useful. Padme spared one last glance at Anakin, allowing herself a small wave goodbye. It was time to begin her journey to the Republic Executive Building. Coruscant's nighttime sprawled beneath a moonless sky, the endless streams of air traffic creating rivers of light between the towering buildings. From her balcony on the penthouse apartment, Padme had mapped every detail of Captain Panaka's foolproof security system. She'd learned long ago that Panaka was thorough but unimaginative. He protected doors, windows, and obvious access points, but never considered someone might use the structural support beams beneath her balcony for a controlled descent. The magnetic grapple found its anchor point beneath the balcony's decorative trim. No dramatic swings across Coruscant tonight, just a controlled descent to the service platform 2 levels below, where maintenance crews regularly worked on environmental systems. With practiced efficiency, she swung herself over the railing, using the line to control her descent. The maintenance uniform's loose fabric barely rustled as she moved through the dead zone between security sweeps. Landing silently on the service platform's grating, she tugged the grapple line twice. The magnetic anchor detached with a soft click. From here, the path to the executive building was a masterwork of misdirection she'd rehearsed dozens of times over the years. The platform she had landed on connected to a public transit hub 3 levels down, one of countless anonymous throughways in Coruscant's endless layers. The pedestrian throughway was a maze of vendor stalls and temporary structures, perfect for disappearing into the flow of beings heading home after their shifts. She joined them with ease, her maintenance uniform making her just another anonymous face. 3 different public transports would take her within range of the executive building, each transfer putting more distance between her and any potential trail. The first transport was crowded with third-shift workers, the second with cleaning crews. By the third, she was just another maintenance tech heading to an overnight repair job. No direct routes, nothing memorable. Through it all, her mind drifted to the chaos she would soon unleash at the executive building, and by extension, the galaxy. She knew every entrance, every security pattern, every blind spot. The executive building had been her playground, her practice arena for the day she'd finally get to kill there. How fitting that Palpatine's arrogance had made him the perfect target, trying to send her away like some errant child. The executive building loomed ahead. Most beings would find it intimidating. Padme saw only opportunities. She observed a maintenance entrance, her pulse quickening beneath the black filter mask. Workers moved in and out, flashing IDs with practiced routine. She'd spent years studying their patterns during Senate sessions, stealing their cards just for practice. Now those years of petty theft would finally serve their true purpose. A maintenance worker passed close by. With movements practiced hundreds of times, she bumped into him, apologized, and walked away with his ID card. Behind her, she heard his confused padding of pockets, followed by curses. She simply scanned the ID and walked in. There was no one and no droid stationed to verify if a face matched an identification. These regulations were almost never followed, as maintenance workers were never deemed threats, a security weakness she had long planned to exploit. Even if there had been facial verification protocols in place, Padme had preparations for that too. She had acquired detailed holo-recordings of various maintenance workers, ready to create sin-skin masks that would perfectly match their features. She'd studied their patterns, ready to either temporarily borrow their identities or permanently silence them if needed. But such elaborate measures proved unnecessary. In the building the Republic believed so secure, all she needed was to swipe an ID and scan it. The arrogance of power had created the perfect blind spot, the kind that made killing so much simpler. Inside, she moved with the confidence of someone who belonged. The maintenance uniform and kit drew no second glances. She was just another anonymous worker in a building full of them. She found an empty maintenance office on the 3rd floor, one she'd identified months ago as a perfect blind spot in the security grid. The computer spike felt warm in her hands as she removed it from her kit. This piece of technology had cost her more credits than most beings would see in a lifetime. 3 information brokers had died getting it to her, and 2 more had to disappear to keep its existence quiet. Worth every credit and corpse now. The spike slid into the terminal with a satisfying click. Immediately it began its work, subtle at first, creating small glitches in random security feeds. Over the next hour, those glitches would spread like a virus through the building's systems. Camera feeds would loop, then fail. Sensor grids would report false positives, then shut down. Security logs would corrupt themselves, trying to compensate. She watched the first errors appear on the terminal's display, a smile spreading beneath her mask. Each small failure would prompt automated fixes, which would then spread the corruption further. The more the system tried to repair itself, the more thoroughly it would be destroyed. Once the spike had fully infiltrated the building's systems, spreading its infection through their core networks, she removed it and carefully tucked it into the secret compartment of the wine box. The damage was done. The virus would continue eating through their security protocols even without the spike present. And after completing her work in the building, she'd plug in the spike one final time, entering the acceleration sequence that would turn its gradual corruption into a cascading failure. Within minutes, the virus would tear through the network's core systems, devouring security logs and camera feeds until nothing remained of her presence in those halls. By the time the bodies were found, the entire system would have cannibalized itself beyond recovery. Padmé glided through the maintenance corridors with fluid efficiency. Years of studying the building's patrol patterns had revealed countless gaps in security. The hour, nearly 2100, also worked in her favor. The executive building's vast halls stood nearly empty, most officials having departed hours ago. She slipped from the maintenance sector into the administrative wing through one of her mapped blind spots, timing her movement between patrol cycles. The few beings still present in the administrative section, late working aides, cleaning staff, the occasional protocol droid, paid no attention to another maintenance worker. This was exactly why she'd chosen this disguise. In a building this massive, support staff moved constantly between sections. No one questioned their presence or authorization. They were invisible. Her eyes flicked to one of the massive holoscreens mounted along the corridor wall, a sprawling display of administrative data showing which officials were currently in the building. The screen cycled through its endless refresh, names and status indicators, scrolling in neat, high galactic script. Among the blur of information, Slymore's status displayed in. A few cycles later, Mas Amedda's status said the same. Not that she needed the confirmation. She was well aware of their schedules. The beings whose fingerprints she carried were exactly where she had known they would be. She reached storage room 2187, one of many perfect hiding spots she'd identified over years of preparation. Just 3 doors down from Palpatine's office, it was ideal. The security cameras here suffered from both her spike's growing infection and a long-standing maintenance cycle glitch she discovered during her infiltration tests. Plus, few would think to check a simple storage room so close to the Chancellor's office. Beings always overlooked the obvious. The kid went behind the cleaning droid rack. She removed the maintenance uniform and concealed it inside, revealing the elegant but practical attire beneath, perfect for an evening meeting. From the kit's hidden compartment, she retrieved the ornate wine box with its deadly cargo. Moving like a ghost through the shadows between security sweeps, she slipped back into the administrative wing hallway, unnoticed. After stashing the worker's filter mask with her disguise, she still needed to conceal her face while blending in. From her pocket, she retrieved the compressed disc of a high-end air filtration mask. The kind of elegant model favored by Coruscant's elite, it expanded to reveal sleek, angular contours and a softly glowing filtration unit. In the administrative levels of the executive building, with it on her face, she was now just another wealthy being taking standard precautions against the capital's polluted air. Around her, security systems continued their cascade of failures. The spike was performing exactly as promised, creating just enough chaos to keep everyone distracted without triggering a full security lockdown. As she approached Palpatine's office, her hand tightened around the wine box. Inside, alongside the vintage bottle, lay her tools of death. The axe components, ready for assembly, the bottled Guhun, still alive and waiting. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with pure anticipation. After years of practicing infiltration in this building, of stealing IDs just to learn security responses, of dreaming about spilling blood in these halls, she was finally here. The corridor to Palpatine's door was clear, everything precisely as planned. Through the darkened corridor, Padme approached Palpatine's office. The two Senate guards stood at attention, their ceremonial force pikes catching the dim light. She removed the filter mask, tucking it away smoothly. Time to become Senator Amidala again. Senator Amidala to see the Chancellor, she announced. One guard activated his comm. Chancellor, Senator Amidala is here to see you. Ah, yes, Palpatine's voice crackled through. Send her in. The guard stepped aside, the doors sliding open. Padme walked in and found Palpatine in his office. Senator Amidala. Palpatine's smile seemed genuine. You honor me with this visit. She lifted the wine box, letting the light catch its ornate surface. Chancellor, I brought something special. The 52 Naboo Reserve. His eyes lit up with recognition. The same vintage he'd shared with his own master before. Well, the Chancellor's office was a masterwork of architecture, a circular chamber with multiple levels connected by elegant walkways. The main meeting area occupied the central space, with plush chairs arranged around a curved desk that gave Palpatine both a view of Coruscant's skyline and clear sightlines to every entrance. Above, a service area wrapped along the chamber's curved walls, accessible by a short flight of stairs. Palpatine settled into his high-backed chair, positioned to survey the entire room. Even the service area above was visible from his seat, a testament to his need for control. An archway in the circular wall led to stairs ascending to the curved upper level. At the top, a walkway with an ornate railing curved along the chamber's circumference. From this walkway, a door opened into a service area where a counter wrapped along the wall for droids to prepare refreshments. Padme had noted, during earlier visits, how the counter's position would provide perfect cover, while keeping the Chancellor's chair in view below. The next hour passed in careful calculation, disguised as reminiscence. Padme matched him drink for drink at first, letting the wine and conversation flow. She watched as the alcohol slowly worked its way through his system, his usual sharp focus beginning to blur. When he started talking about his plans for the Jedi Order, she knew the wine was having its desired effect. Palpatine, meanwhile, sensed nothing unusual from Padme, just waves of pure, uncomplicated glee radiating from the young senator. Joy at honoring her mentor, perhaps. How touching, Palpatine thought. He didn't bother looking deeper. Why would he need to? His thoughts were already drifting to his grand plans, to the fall of the Jedi. That insufferable green troll Yoda would be the first, Palpatine thought. Palpatine's speech grew slightly slurred as he slouched back in his chair, staring out at Coruscant's glittering expanse. She kept his glass full while discreetly setting aside her own, watching as his eyes grew heavy. His thoughts seemed to drift inward, perhaps to dreams of power, while she pictured the tools waiting in her wine box. Would you excuse me a moment, Chancellor? Let me fetch another bottle. She rose gracefully, lifting the ornate box. The next vintage I brought pairs beautifully with this one. Palpatine merely nodded, his attention fixed on the cityscape, likely imagining it all under his control. He didn't notice as she ascended the stairs to the service area above, where she'd have a perfect view of his chair below. She ascended the stairs, opened the door to the service area, and left it ajar, allowing her to monitor Palpatine while staying out of his sight. The curved counter would keep her preparations hidden, while giving her the high ground for what came next. Do you know about my family, Chancellor? Padme's voice echoed slightly from the service level as she opened her wine box, the curved architecture amplifying even whispered sounds. The Nayberries, Palpatine's voice drifted up lazily, thick with wine. Such a noble lineage. Your parents must be quite accomplished, he slurred out. The early members were a little too passive for my interest, Padme began. She pulled out the maintenance smock first, extra large, designed to cover her completely, and slipped it on with practiced efficiency. She removed her elegant senatorial gloves and replaced them with ones from her murder tools, thin enough for dexterity, but strong enough to prevent any trace evidence. Through the curved viewport, Coruscant's lights cast long shadows across her workspace. But when my mother released this 24 years ago, she said, pointing to herself, I think our bloodline really came into its own, politically and psychotically. Her gloved hands quietly assembled the axe against the curved counter while she stalked the walkway's circumference. Below, through the ornate railing, she could see Palpatine's head nodding slightly, his unfocused eyes fixed on Coruscant's skyline as he dreamed of his new empire. Meanwhile, Padme continued. The whole family gained a clear, crisp reputation, and a new sheen of consummate professionalism that really gave our name a big boost. I've been compared to my sister Sola, but I think I have a far more bitter, cynical sense of problem solving. She descended the stairs with lethal grace, the weapon held low against her leg, making sure Palpatine does not see it. The chamber's perfect acoustics carried the soft tap of each step, not that Palpatine was aware enough to notice. "Hey, Senator!" Palpatine's words slurred slightly, barely registering through his wine-hazed vision as Padme appeared at the edge of his field of view in what looked like a cleaning smock. "Yes, Chancellor," Padme replied. "Did something spill up there? Should I call a service droid?" Palpatine asked. "No, Chancellor," Padme assured him. "Is that a cleaning smock?" Palpatine inquired. "Yes, it is," Padme confirmed. Palpatine nodded vaguely, already drifting back to pleasant fantasies of cooking Master Yoda with Force lightning. Moving to the room's environmental controls, Padme activated the chamber's audio system. Naboo classical music filled the circular space, loud enough to mask what was coming, not so loud as to seem suspicious. "When I entered politics," she stepped closer, her voice rising above the orchestral swells as she raised the axe, "I created what I consider my most accomplished method of governance. I think my undisputed masterpiece is my approach to being underestimated. A technique so subtle, most beings probably don't see it coming. But they should, because it's not just about maintaining power and the importance of control, it's also a personal statement about what happens when you only see the surface of someone like me." "Hey, Sheev!" Her scream echoed through the chamber, nearly lost in the crescendo of Naboo's strings as she brought the axe down toward Palpatine's face. The Chancellor's wine-addled mind registered the danger, but not all of it. You see, through the Force's history, loss of concentration had proven fatal time and again. Coleman Trebor falling to Jango's simple blaster fire, Shaq T killed during meditation when her focus turned inward, Anakin Skywalker failing to save both Rush Clovis and Padme when his emotions overwhelmed him, Mace Windu missing Skywalker's approach in his moment of triumph, and Ahsoka dropping Steela Gerrera after a blaster bolt disrupted her concentration. These are some examples of a lack of focus failing Force users. Even the most powerful could fail when their concentration wavered. Here, despite being as drunk as Darth Plagueis when he was killed, Palpatine does sense and stop Padme's axe before it reached his face. But Palpatine's hazy Force push caught only the wooden handle, halting it mid-swing. But the head of the axe, loosened by Padme's hasty, excitement-fueled assembly, tore free from the handle. A simple matter of physics. The Force held the handle in place, but the momentum of Padme's swing transferred entirely to the unsecured head. The blade spun through the air, a deadly arc that ended in Palpatine's right eye with a wet thud. By the time Palpatine even registered the blade's gleam, 3 inches of razor-sharp durasteel were already buried deep into his eye and cranial cavity. In that brutal instant, the Force barrier he'd tried to muster dissolved into nothing, as though his will were nothing more than a fine mist scattered by a sudden gale. Every cunning plan, every twisted ambition, every shiver of dark authority he once commanded flickered and died beneath the onslaught of agony. His neurons, once orchestrating a symphony of malicious brilliance, now misfired into panicked silence. He couldn't marshal another whisper of power, couldn't even form a coherent thought. The Chancellor's shield revealed something that shocked her. He had the Force, but she was far too enraged to process this revelation. Snatching up the shaft like a club, she brought it down on his head, again and again and again, the impacts lost in the soaring musical arrangement. "Try sending me to Naboo now, you criffing bastard," she screamed. The handle cracked against his skull. "Criffing son of a bitch," she yelled again, accompanied by another strike. Blood sprayed across her smock, spattering the curved walls. "Patronizing son of a Hutt." Each impact drove him further into his chair as she screamed, her voice harmonizing with the music's finale. His body finally slumped forward over his desk, blood pooling on the ornate surface where he'd so recently been dreaming of empire. After quickly stripping off the blood-spattered smock and tucking it away, Padme rushed to the door. She let genuine adrenaline color her voice as she burst out into the corridor. "Guards, please, something's wrong with the Chancellor." The 2 Senate guards immediately moved to enter. Padme stepped aside, letting them rush past her into the chamber. She followed them in, quietly sealing the door behind them. The music would mask whatever came next. "Chancellor," the first guard called out, both men now focused entirely on the slumped figure at the desk. The compressed needle mechanism in her sleeve, the reason she always favored long flowing garments, launched with surgical precision, catching the first guard in the throat just below his helmet. As he started to crumple, she was already moving. Her hand caught the second guard's pike as he began to turn, using his own momentum against him. Her other arm locked around his head, and with one savage twist, his neck snapped with a sound lost in the symphony. A specific sequence of finger movements retracted the needle back into her wrist mechanism, a simple chrono on her right arm to any casual observer. Padmé surveyed the carnage with professional detachment. Palpatine slumped across his desk. The guards sprawled near the entrance. The music continued to fill the circular chamber. Her gloved hands retrieved the film containing the prints from her pocket. She had 2 sets of prints to work with, Padmé Amidala and Sly Moore. Time to choose her patsy. She pulled out both films, holding them up to the bright light of the chamber. 2 beings, 2 possible stories to tell. Her mind weighed the options as she circled the Chancellor's desk. Padmé Amidala, she tilted her head, considering. She remembered his simpering manner earlier that day, the way he'd practically fallen over himself to shake her hand. Then there was Sly Moore. Padmé's eyes narrowed as she recalled their earlier encounter, the administrator's cold dismissal, that slight pause before taking her hand, as if touching a senator was beneath her station. The memory of Moore's imperious tone, the Chancellor was particularly concerned, sparked something dark behind Padmé's eyes. Particularly concerned, were you? She whispered to the film containing Moore's prints, a maniacal grin spreading across her face. Well, now you get to be very concerned, Administrator. And so Padmé selected the murderer of Chancellor Palpatine. But before she could plant Moore's prints, there were a few things she needed to do. Padmé made her way up to the service room and opened her wine box. She retrieved the spike, then descended back to the main office. She pulled the compressed mask from her pocket, watching it expand from its disc form before securing it firmly to her face. Then she checked for security devices. During countless visits to this office, her trained eye had spotted the subtle nodes of surveillance equipment concealed in the ornate architecture. A concealed signal detector she'd carried confirmed her suspicions and revealed something interesting. The surveillance data never left these walls. Instead of being beamed to HoloNet remote backups, all recordings were stored locally. Everything that happened in the sanctum stayed here, seen by his eyes alone. In fact, her careful analysis of the building's network architecture had revealed that Palpatine's office ran on its own isolated system. Unlike the standardized security grid that protected the rest of the executive building, the Chancellor maintained a private network, likely installed by his personal technicians, completely divorced from official Republic protocols. She found the terminal tucked beneath his ornate desk, separate from the executive building's main security grid, another display of his obsession with control. A smile spread beneath her mask as she plugged in the spike. The virus would destroy his surveillance system and could have erased any HoloNet backups if they existed. But in his overconfidence, he hadn't bothered with such precautions. The Chancellor's hubris had led him to believe no one would dare, let alone manage, to breach his sanctum's defenses. A small red light on the spike pulsed steadily, confirming the infection had taken hold. She unplugged it and made her way back up to the service room, tucking the device safely into her wine box. She almost laughed, and now it was time to bring Sly Moore to justice for the crime of being rude to Padmé Amidala. She meticulously began planting Moore's prints on the shattered axe handle, the wine glasses, key surfaces that would suggest a violent confrontation. The crime scene would need signs of a real struggle, evidence that Palpatine had defended himself before falling. Padmé would have to inflict those signs of resistance on Moore's arrogant face as well. The administrator's fingerprints alone would be enough to frame her. But if Padmé was being honest with herself, the thought of making that cold, condescending being bleed before framing her, well, that was just a delightful bonus, and worth the little extra time she'd need to spend there before knocking out Moore and leaving, or so the Naboo senator thought. With the preparations made and all traces of her own presence wiped away, Padmé grabbed Palpatine's comlink with her gloved hands and dialed Moore's frequency, channeling years of political mimicry into one final performance as the Chancellor. Moore, her voice captured his distinctive dry tone perfectly, adding a hint of urgency. Come to my office, immediately, alone. Of course, Chancellor. Moore's immediate response carried that same cold efficiency from earlier that would soon be her undoing. When the approximate time for Moore's arrival approached, Padmé pressed her ear to the cold floor near the door. The vibrations through the building's structure would tell her exactly when prey approached. She'd staged everything perfectly. 3 bodies arranged to tell a story of violence and betrayal, and soon, a 4th would help sell the tale. Let the HoloNet spin their theories about political rivalries and power plays. The faint tremors through the floor announced soft footsteps approaching. Padmé silently rose, retrieving an ornate Naboo vase from a nearby pedestal and positioning herself beside the door. Through the floor, she felt Moore's weight shift as she stopped, but to her surprise, Rather than entering, Moore seemed to stand and stare at the door. Then her comm signal lit up Palpatine's device. Padme glanced at the carnage she'd created, then answered the comm she still gripped with perfect composure. "Yes? I'm here," Moore's cold voice stated. "Enter," Padme replied in Palpatine's dry tones, disconnecting immediately. She wondered if Moore had sensed something amiss, but regardless, the door slid open. Moore stepped in, freezing at the sight of Palpatine's mutilated form and the fallen guards. Padme swung the vase in a perfect arc toward her head, only for Moore's hand to snap up, catching it without even looking away from the carnage. Moore's head turned a precise 90 degrees toward Padme, eyes cold with deadly focus. The music swelled around them, ready to mask the violence to come. Unlike Palpatine earlier, Moore walked in expecting an attack. Her minor force sensitivity might not have been impressive, but it was enough to sense danger. Padme released the vase instantly, dropping low and driving the heel of her palm toward Moore's exposed wrist. A sharp crack echoed under the orchestral strings as Moore's arm twisted away impossibly fast. Padme's momentum carried her forward as Moore's left hand came up in a guard position. The failed palm strike flowed into an upward elbow aimed at Moore's jaw. The administrator swayed backward, just enough for the strike to miss by millimeters, the movement eerily smooth. Moore countered with a straight right. The impact against Padme's forearm block sent vibrations through her bones. She used the force of the block to spin into a roundhouse kick aimed at Moore's knee. Their shins collided with a sharp crack that resonated through the chamber. The music covered their grunts of pain. Padme landed and immediately launched a combination: jab, cross, uppercut. Moore's hands intercepted each strike in rapid succession, her blocks arriving a fraction of a second before Padme's fists, the impacts mixing with the rising crescendo. The administrator's counterattack came like lightning, a palm strike that Padme had to throw herself backward to avoid. As Moore pressed her advantage with a follow-up kick, Padme shifted inside the arc of the strike. She caught Moore's leg and drove her shoulder into the administrator's sternum, the impact forcing out a harsh wheeze. Instead of going down, Moore's hand found her throat with crushing force. The music masked Padme's choked gasp as she struck the nerve cluster in Moore's inner thigh. Moore's free leg came up in a knee strike that caught Padme's temple as they separated. The impact sent stars across her vision. Staggering slightly, Padme assessed her opponent through the ringing in her head. Moore moved with alien precision. No wasted motion, no telegraphing. Each strike carried unnatural power. The throbbing in her ribs and temple confirmed to Padme what she suspected. In a prolonged fight, she would lose. Moore pressed forward with mechanical efficiency, her strikes coming in perfect combinations. The sharp sounds of impact punctuated the music. Padme deflected a jab, blood from her split lip spattering the floor as she slipped across, but a kick to her thigh nearly buckled her leg. The impact echoed through her bones. She countered with an elbow strike that Moore caught in a joint lock. The pressure built until something in her arm creaked ominously. Using Moore's grip against her, Padme rolled through the lock and transitioned into a throw attempt. Moore rode the throw but landed on her feet, already counterattacking. As they exchanged another flurry of strikes, Padme's mind raced through her options. The compressed needle mechanism in her chrono was her most lethal contingency. A 10-inch needle capable of launching with enough force to penetrate bone. The triggering sequence was elegantly simple. A precise palm extension, first 2 fingers, then 3, would release the spring-loaded mechanism. But the positioning had to be perfect. She'd need to bait Moore into a spot where Moore's neck or face was directly in front of her forearm. That meant giving Moore an opening, letting her think she had control. Padme could deliberately expose her left arm, let Moore apply a joint lock until the bone snapped. The pain would be excruciating, but it would make her next move seem desperate and predictable. With one arm disabled, she could attempt a clumsy strike that any trained fighter would naturally block by catching her wrist, positioning Moore's neck perfectly in line with the needle's trajectory. The specific hand position required for the trigger would look like nothing more than the desperate grip of someone fighting with an injured arm. But if her timing was off by even a fraction of a second, or if Moore blocked from any other angle, she'd lose her surprise advantage. And given Moore's unnatural speed and strength, one mistake would be fatal. A roundhouse kick from Moore clipped her shoulder, sending her spinning toward the upper level. In that moment of rotation, Padme's eyes landed on her wine box, still sitting on the counter where she'd assembled the axe. Another plan crystallized instantly. Padme sprinted up the curved staircase that wound around the chamber's perimeter. Moore's force-enhanced speed let her close the gap as they neared the top. Just before Padme could reach the upper walkway, the administrator's arm snaked around her neck from behind, yanking her into a vice-like rear chokehold. Padme felt her feet leave the steps as Moore lifted and squeezed, cutting off both blood and air. Moore's grip was technically perfect, one arm crushing Padme's throat while the other hand locked behind Padme's head for maximum pressure. The music nearly drowned out the sound of Padme choking, her legs kicking uselessly in the air. Pure survival instinct kicked in. Padme drove both elbows back into Moore's ribs, while simultaneously tucking her chin to create a fraction more space to breathe. Moore's grip loosened just enough. 3 steps from where the stairs met the walkway, Padme grabbed the railing. Using it as leverage, she twisted hard to her left, throwing them both off balance. They tumbled backward down several steps before separating on impact. Before Padme could fully regain her feet, Moore's leg drove into her ribs from behind with a sickening crack. The impact sent her stumbling forward up the remaining stairs onto the walkway. As Padme spun to face her attacker, wincing at the movement, Moore was already closing in. They exchanged a rapid series of strikes near the railing. Moore's right hook met Padme's left forearm block, while Padme kept her right arm held close, protecting it. Moore deflected Padme's low kick, answering with a hook kick that Padme barely ducked. The movement sent pain through her ribs, throwing off her balance. As she tried to recover, Moore slipped past her guard, catching Padme's right fingers. Moore's right forearm drove upward into Padme's jaw, forcing her head back while twisting the trapped hand outward. Moore's fingers clammed down like a hydraulic press. There was a horrific crunching sound as Moore crushed the bones, breaking Padme's fingers in multiple places. Her scream of agony was muffled by her mask. Not releasing the ruined hand, Moore twisted the arm with mechanical precision. 2 distinct snaps echoed off the chamber walls as the bone broke in multiple places. Using Padme's mangled arm like a lever, Moore swung her entire body away from the inner railing, smashing her into the chamber's outer wall beside the service room entrance. The impact knocked what little air remained from her lungs. Padme crumpled to the floor beside the service room door, her vision blurring, broken ribs screaming with each desperate gasp. Moore advanced, her movements still eerily precise, driven by a cold, relentless fury. The administrator reached down, clearly intending to finish off Padme. Through waves of blinding pain, Padme knew this was her last chance. Her right arm was useless, shattered fingers hanging limp, but her left hand still worked. With agonizing effort, her left hand slipped beneath her chrono, fingers trembling as they found the familiar, small button hidden on the underside of her wrist, a pressure-activated trigger for the concealed needle mechanism. Moore, focused on her prey's obvious weakness, didn't notice the subtle movement. She reached down, her fingers closing around Padme's throat, lifting her from the floor with terrifying ease. The administrator's grip tightened, cutting off both air and blood flow. Padme's vision swam, the edges darkening, but she held on, every cell in her body screaming in defiance. As Moore hauled her against the wall, her face contorted in a silent snarl, Padme used the last of her strength to bring her right wrist up. Her left hand, still gripping the shattered arm, angled it so the hidden needle was pointed directly at Moore's forearm, mere inches away. With a final agonizing 2-second press of her left thumb against the button, she triggered the mechanism. The needle launched with a nearly silent hiss, a blur of silver that pierced straight through the bone of Moore's outstretched forearm with sickening force. Padme wanted to aim the needle at Moore's throat or face, but with the administrator keeping her pinned at arm's length against the wall, any attempt to angle the broken arm that high would have telegraphed her intention. The forearm had been her only clean shot. The needle's impact made Moore's grip falter just enough. In that split second of shock, Padme struck. Her left hand drove into Moore's throat while her back braced against the wall, letting her channel what strength remained through her leg. Her boot caught Moore square in the chest. The impact sent the administrator stumbling backward toward the stairs she'd just climbed. Moore lost her balance and tumbled down the curved staircase. Padme staggered toward the service room entrance, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Her left hand found the doorframe, steadying herself as waves of pain radiated from her broken ribs and shattered arm. She dragged herself through the service room entrance, left hand trembling as she engaged the lock. Blood dripped from her crushed fingers as she reached for the wine box, knowing Moore would be back any second. The broken ribs on her left side sent warning stabs of pain with each inhale. Cracked, but not yet displaced enough to puncture anything vital. With her left hand trembling, she opened her wine box's hidden compartment. Alongside the bottled Kohun lay a small injector of combat-grade Synstim, more potent than the standard military version and far more dangerous. Another expensive tool she'd acquired through black market channels, saved for just such an emergency. Gritting her teeth through the mask, she pressed the injector into her thigh. The effect was immediate, a burning sensation spreading through her veins as the powerful stimulant flooded her system. Her heart rate spiked, vision sharpening as endorphins and adrenaline surged. The pain didn't vanish, but it transformed into a distant roar she could push aside. Her left arm and legs tingled with artificial strength, though her shattered right arm remained useless. She knew she had minutes at most before the violent movements she needed to make would worsen the damage. One good slam into her ribs could drive the broken ends inward. But with the synth stim coursing through her system, she'd be able to keep fighting even if that happened, at least long enough to finish Moore. Through the synth stim haze, Padme could hear Moore's fists impacting the door. If the administrator had any sense, she'd call security. Game over. But the rhythmic crashes against the door told her what she'd hoped. Moore's cold efficiency had given way to rage. She wanted to finish this herself. The door began to buckle inward with each strike. With her left hand trembling, her shattered right arm hanging useless, Padme's remaining functional fingers worked the bottle's seal. The Kuhun writhed inside as it sensed their elevated body heat. The door finally burst inward with a deafening crash, swinging wide. Moore rushed in to find Padme with her back turned, seemingly cornered. The administrator closed the distance with lethal intent, not noticing the creature held behind Padme's back. The Kuhun sailed through the air as Padme spun, its segmented body twisting as it oriented toward Moore's body heat. It landed on her shoulder and immediately plunged its stinger deep into her neck. Moore's hand instinctively shot to the sting, her fingers gripping the vile creature in a desperate reflex. With a shudder, she hurled it out the door, her focus breaking for just an instant. That split second was all Padme needed. She lunged forward, driving her left fist into Moore's throat with all her synth stim-enhanced strength. As Moore staggered, Padme's good hand locked around the back of her neck. Using her grip and her still-functioning legs for leverage, Padme began violently slamming Moore's face into the counter's edge. Each impact punctuated by a wet crack as blood sprayed across the surface. The venom was already working through Moore's system, weakening her resistance with each brutal slam. Padme's own broken ribs screamed in protest, but the synth stim let her maintain her savage rhythm until the administrator's struggles finally ceased. Whether from the venom or the repeated impacts that had shattered her skull, Moore was dead. With her good hand gripping the administrator's clothing, Padme dragged the body to the walkway's edge. With a final heave, she sent Moore tumbling down to land beside Palpatine. The administrator's broken face came to rest, inches from the Chancellor's, their dead eyes locked in an eternal stare as their blood merged into a single pool. Padme's own blood had spattered during the fight, an oversight she hadn't anticipated but was prepared for. From the wine box's hidden compartment, she retrieved a small canister of forensic cleanser. One-handed, she sprayed the chemical compound wherever her blood had fallen, watching it dissolve any trace of her genetic material. Grunting with pain, she retrieved Ameda's prints. She meticulously wiped Moore's prints from the axe and other surfaces, replacing them with Ameda's. His prints went on the axe handle, the door frame, strategic points that would suggest his movement through the scene. Everything was quickly set up to make it seem like Amida walked in and killed Palpatine, the guards, and more. The holotubers will make up 100 theories on what happened, Padme thought. After packing away her bloodied smock and cleaning supplies, she took one final look at her handiwork. For a moment, she reached for one of Moore's pale fingers, the urge to take a trophy almost overwhelming. But sentiment like that got killers caught. The memory would have to suffice. The look on Palpatine's face when the axe head struck, the sound of Moore's skull meeting the counter, those were trophies enough. Through her gloved hand, she activated Palpatine's comm. Vice Chair Amida. She mimicked Palpatine's dry tones perfectly. Your current location? In my office. Chancellor. Attending to the day's final reports. Come to my office immediately. Bring the complete security projection reports for the past month. Alone. Of course, Chancellor. I'll need a few minutes to compile and transfer the data. I'll be there shortly. Ameda's deep voice crackled through the comm before she tossed it into the blood pool. Let them find it there. The request had been carefully chosen. Those projection reports would take at least 7 minutes to gather and transfer. More than enough time to leave the Chancellor's office. Padme pressed her ear to the floor near the door to detect any vibrations from footsteps in the corridor. The building was mostly deserted at this hour, but with her injuries, any additional confrontation would be difficult. Satisfied at the silence, she staggered to her feet, wine box in hand. The Naboo vintage could stay. Between her gloves and Palpatine being Chancellor of Naboo origin, there was nothing suspicious about Naboo wine in his office. With no trace of her presence left, no prints, no footage, nothing, she gave a cheerful wave to the bodies sprawled across the floor. She hadn't bothered looking for the worm after it stung Moore, too dangerous to risk handling it again. Somewhere in the shadows, the venomous creature slithered unseen. Let that add to the mystery, she thought. The synth stim coursing through her system allowed her to walk upright despite her injuries, though her shattered right arm hung uselessly at her side as she made her way slowly but deliberately into the corridor. The storage room 3 doors down from Palpatine's office held her kit, hidden behind a rack of cleaning droids. Each step was agony as she retrieved it. Her left hand trembled as she exchanged her high-end filtration mask for the worker's version, then pulled the maintenance uniform over her clothes. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her broken bones. She tucked the expensive mask into the kit and began moving quickly. At the terminal she'd used earlier, she plugged in the spike one final time. A few commands initiated the purge sequence, telling the virus to devour everything immediately rather than slowly corrupt it. She retrieved the spike and continued through corridors growing increasingly chaotic with confused maintenance droids and bewildered tech staff. The network infection was spreading beautifully. Security panels flickered with error messages. Climate control systems surged randomly, the perfect cover for her escape. She found a maintenance exit, using her stolen ID one final time. Security personnel rushed past her disguise without a second glance, too busy dealing with terminals that sparked and died. The synth stim was rapidly fading as she made her way through Coruscant's levels. Each step sent waves of agony through her broken ribs and shattered arm. The night shift workers barely glanced at another tired maintenance tech heading home, even if she was favoring one arm. Back in her building, the service platform 2 levels below her balcony provided perfect cover. One-handed, she attached the magnetic grapple to her balcony's railing above. The device's motorized retraction pulled her up. She hauled herself over the railing, nearly passing out from the effort, the maintenance uniform catching slightly on the decorative trim. Staggering into her bedroom, Padme saw Anakin, still unconscious on her bed, exactly as she'd left him. The synth stim was wearing off rapidly now, the pain becoming nearly unbearable. She carefully removed the maintenance kit and set it aside, then retrieved her personal medical supplies from a hidden compartment in her wardrobe. Working methodically despite the agony, she first stabilized her broken ribs, applying Bacti-infused compression bandages to prevent any fragments from shifting dangerously. Her shattered right hand required more extensive attention. She carefully aligned the crushed fingers as best she could, using small Durasteel splints and more Bacta bandages to immobilize them. The broken arm she set in a concealed brace, designed to fit under clothing, gritting her teeth against the pain as she adjusted it. Each movement was precisely controlled despite her trembling muscles. The bruising from the fight was extensive, but nothing vital seemed permanently damaged. She applied more Bacta patches to the worst areas, then changed into a high-necked, long-sleeve formal dress that concealed her injuries. A fitted glove covered her bandaged right hand. Glancing at the chrono on her wall, Padme raised an eyebrow. Only 3 hours had passed since she'd left. Not bad for assassination, combat, and injury treatment. A smile played across her lips as she recalled the satisfying thunk of the axe, the wet crack of Moore's skull against the counter. Her eyes drifted to Anakin's sleeping form. She found herself wondering if he would sense it through the Force, if she tried to drive a knife into his heart right now. The thought came unbidden, an impulsive curiosity. She could stage it as an assassin's break-in. Anakin tried to defend and... Padme dismissed the idea with a slight shake of her head. It would be too hard to pull off, and Anakin hadn't broken her code, which was, be rude to me, and I will kill you. Quite the opposite. Unlike the endless parade of politicians with their fake smiles and calculated courtesy, he'd been genuinely pleased to see her, his awkward politeness refreshingly authentic. She checked his comlink. No calls from Obi-Wan yet, but soon, she knew, every communication device in the galaxy would be buzzing with the news. The thought sent a delicious thrill through her. Retrieving the neurological counteragent from her medical supplies, Padme slowly dragged a chair next to where Anakin lay. She settled into it carefully, mindful of her ribs, and administered the compound that would neutralize the knockout agent in his system. Then she watched, a small smile playing on her lips, as he began to stir. Anakin's eyes fluttered open in the dimly lit room. His hand instinctively went to where his lightsaber should be as he stretched out with the Force, trying to orient himself. He tried to recall what had happened, but the last memory he had was of sharing a drink with Padme, and after that, nothing. It's as if his memories had been erased. There he is, my protector. Padme's voice came from beside him. He turned to find her smiling face in the dim light. What happened? He asked groggily. Well, Anakin, you had a drink, passed out, during which someone came to assassinate us. They killed us, and now we're in hell. See that door? I tried walking out it, but it leads back into this room. It's a spatial loop. So yeah, that's what happened. Anakin was only about 92% sure she was joking. Seeing his confused expression, Padme switched to a more plausible explanation. I accidentally poured us the wrong drink and knocked us both out. I only just woke up myself. She showed him her right arm. I almost crushed my hand on the floor when I fell, she added, indicating the casing visible under her glove. I was irresponsible. I failed my task, Anakin said, shame creeping into his voice. It's only irresponsible if you tell somebody, Padme replied with a conspiratorial smile. Anakin checked for his comlink, finding it exactly where it should be. No calls from Obi-Wan. Let's just keep this our little secret, Anakin, Padme suggested, as she watched him regaining his mobility. Instead of watching for threats, I got drunk and fell asleep on your bed, Anakin berated himself. My bed? Oh no, Anakin, now we'll have to get married. Padme gasped in mock horror before laughing. Anakin, don't worry. The wine I got needed to be mixed with Chandrila and spring water. Otherwise, it's too powerful. I didn't notice until too late. Anakin took on a defeated look, his gaze dropping away from her face. The gesture sparked something in Padme, and without hesitation, she leaned forward, despite the protest from her broken ribs. Her left hand, the ungloved one, caught his jaw firmly. She turned his face back toward her, fingers pressed against his skin. The sudden movement made him blink in surprise, his train of self-reproach temporarily forgotten. Their eyes met and held. The moment stretched between them, neither speaking. Her thumb rested against his cheek, barely moving. Anakin's right hand drifted up, touching her fingers where they rested against his face. Her thumb shifted to grip his fingers lightly, almost reflexively. Anakin, she said, her voice quiet in the dim room. She held his gaze, mind racing. She'd moved without thinking when she saw his head starting to turn, knowing the hole in her window would be immediately visible, but now found herself trapped in this manufactured moment, unsure how to naturally transition away from it. Everything had happened so fast. The murder, the cleanup, the injuries. She hadn't had time to properly check the room. A rookie mistake, and now here she was, caught in an awkward intimacy of her own making. I'm glad we met again, she said quietly, managing a small smile as she gently rubbed the skin beneath his right eye with her thumb. At least she could use his tendency toward attachment to her advantage. Will you be coming with me to Naboo tomorrow, Anakin? Padme asked, maintaining her gentle hold on his face. Moving the hand would mean risking his eyes straying to that damning hole in the window. Probably both me and Obi-Wan, Anakin replied. Her mind raced through the implications. She needed extensive medical attention, the kind she could only get at Varikino, her private sanctuary and base of operations. But Obi-Wan's presence would be problematic. The Jedi Master's natural suspicion of politicians meant he might notice things she couldn't afford him seeing, especially during her recovery. Anakin, on the other hand, his attention never seemed to stray far from her face. You know, she said thoughtfully, thumb still brushing his cheek, Master Kenobi seems rather preoccupied with the investigation. While he attends to that important task, you and I could reach the safety of Naboo. She let a playful note enter her voice. I could show you some real wine, the kind that won't knock us out like deadbeat parents at their child's 10th birthday party. Anakin's smile was immediate and genuine. Sure, Padme. Padme returned his smile, giving his cheek a light tap. Great. I will make a strong recommendation to the council. Now, Anakin, were it up to me, I'd let you stay passed out here, but if Obi-Wan sees you... She let the implications hang in the air. Yeah, I should go keep watch outside, he agreed, clearly pleased with how the evening seemed to be unfolding to him. He sensed only happiness emanating from Padme as well, though he had no way of knowing her satisfaction came from entirely different reasons. Padme stood carefully, positioning herself to block his view of the window as she helped him up with her left hand. She walked him to the door, her movements deliberately casual despite her screaming injuries. Anakin turned back at the threshold, his expression earnest. For the first time since leaving his mother, he felt truly seen. Not as the chosen one, not as a problem to be solved, but just as himself. Padme's kindness towards him felt real in a way he hadn't experienced in years of formal Jedi training and political maneuvering. You're very kind, Padme, Anakin said. Oh, for a senator, you mean? She teased, echoing his earlier comment about her beauty. Their shared laughter filled the doorway. Walking back toward her room, Padme turned and added with a genuine smile, You're very kind too, Anakin. And not for a Jedi, you're just a kind person. Anakin smiled in return. Once back in her room, the smile slipped from her face. The euphoria from the murders was already fading. It never did last long. Her mind shifted to a methodical review of potential evidence. Panaka's security recordings would confirm her alibi here. Anakin's testimony would reinforce it. No one could have identified her on the way to the executive building. All traces of her presence had been meticulously erased from the Chancellor's office. The building's internal recordings and security logs would be long gone by now, and everyone who'd identified her there as Senator Amidala was dead. The Chancellor's personal security feeds were wiped clean. Most importantly, there was absolutely no motive connecting her to any of this. If anything, her public record showed consistent support for the policies and people she'd just eliminated. Her political career would actually suffer slightly from these deaths. She might have been considered a suspect if anyone had been monitoring the feeds outside Palpatine's office in real time. But Padme knew the Republic's security protocols. Only areas designated as key security risks were monitored around the clock by flesh and blood security personnel. The Senate's administrative wing, including the Chancellor's office, wasn't considered high risk enough for constant surveillance. The Republic Security Force had long insisted that such sensitive monitoring required sentient beings who could think. Droids weren't trusted with such tasks. It was an old-fashioned approach, but one that had worked in her favor tonight. Security was remarkably lax at the Republic's very heart. Perhaps this incident would change that. Perhaps her actions tonight would prevent an even worse attack on the Republic in the future. Padmé allowed herself a moment's contemplation of this notion before dismissing it entirely. The truth was, she didn't care either way. So what happened after this? Well, Amidala did everyone a favor by promptly dying after waltzing into Palpatine's office and getting stung by the worm. The evidence pointed to him killing Palpatine, Moore, and the guards before accidentally falling victim to a venomous creature. It became a legendary mystery, with holotubers producing thousands of videos speculating about what actually happened. The most prominent theory involves some kind of weird ritual. As for Anakin and Padme, Anakin was devastated by Palpatine's death, but still ended up going to Naboo with Padme. When he had visions of his mother dying, he headed to Tatooine. Padme joined him, partly to keep a close eye on someone who knew too much about her recent activities, and partly because she was growing to enjoy his company. After Shmi died and Anakin killed everything that moved, Padme found his reaction relatable. Given that he was the only person in her life who was never fake with her, she grew to like him more, and eventually they ended up getting married. Dooku still started the Clone Wars without Palpatine, but ultimately lost to the Jedi. Padme used the war to make herself Emperor, and Anakin became the Jedi Cartel's Grand Master after Yoda OD'd on spice. And finally, Luke and Leia ended up being surprisingly normal, despite being the children of this particular Anakin and Padme. And they all lived happily ever after. The end.